The Freeze.
Podcast.
The Freeze.
Podcast.
The Freeze.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Freeze Podcast, the podcast about hip hop chatter. Today's episode, I am going through the latest project by Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morales, and the Big Steppers. This is a big release. Probably the biggest hip hop release, obviously, I would say, of the year, and probably the biggest release in a few years, as Kendrick is, not one to drop many projects. This is his first project in 5 years. So this was kind of, I would say, unexpected, not so unexpected that, it was announced. I think it was announced that he was working on a project like last year. So we've kind of been waiting for a Kendrick Lamar album to come down the pike at some point, and it just never came. And here it is with great fanfare and for good reason. So Mr. Morales in The Big Steppers is kind of, in a way, a departure from, I would say, the more mainstream, I guess, for lack of better words, production from, say, like Damn or Good Kid, Mad City. The production does work, and it does sort of elevate the poetry of Kendrick's words. And really, that is the focus, the emphasis of the album, is what he is saying, the messages that he is conveying throughout the album, rather than the production. That's not to say that there aren't bangers. It's just not an album that you would listen to for that. As like, say, a Good Kid, Mad City album, where there were, singles that were just like, kind of like vibe songs, but they did have like messages in them. It's a tough listen, not because it's bad, but rather because the topics and the themes are so heavy and they weigh on your mind, and this album will have an impact on you long after you finish listening to it, as a great piece of art usually does. And yes, in a word, this album is a piece of art. I would say this is an album that is a piece of fine art. If kind of what the Wu-Tang were trying to do with I forget the name of the album, but that album where it sold like a piece of fine art. I could see an album like this being played in museums for future generations because it is that good. And this album, starts with a song titled United in Grief, and it touches on a lot of things. Trauma is a very big aspect and theme of this album, so much so that there's kind of a backdrop of a voice, kind of like, a Kendrick's therapist talking him through sessions. And I'll get to sort of the other moments as well. But that's definitely an interesting thing to note. And obviously, because of COVID, there is that sort of united moment, that united front that we definitely had in Grief. Obviously, during the pandemic, there was the death of George Floyd, and the Black community was definitely united in their grief when that did occur as well. So it kind of encompasses a lot, and really that's kind of like how I can most concisely put this album. It's a lot, and it is a lot, but that's not to say that it shouldn't be taken in, because I know there is a lot going on in the world, obviously, but this album, in a way, it's good because it's therapeutic. We're united in our grief, and hopefully this will be not just a release for Kendrick, but a relief for people who collectively have been experiencing trauma. So N95 as the next song, which is kind of like the banger song and has a great video. I'm not sure if this was the was this the song? No, it was Savior that mentions the various artists and icons who are not your savior. But that was definitely an interesting perspective. But like the video, there's great imagery and great spiritual messages within the imagery that's shot, and Kendrick really does have very creative videos, and I would highly recommend checking that video out, in particular the N95 video. I pretty much haven't been as impressed with an artist in terms of music videos as I've been with like Kendrick in the last couple of years. So definitely check out the N95 video. There's a lot to unpack there. Let me see if I can actually N95. Yeah, I mean, there's like loose. Obviously, it's sort of like loose references to COVID, but also saying there is like an ad lib where Kendrick goes like, this shit hard," and it kind of ties into the previous theme of like, we're all united in our grief and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I will move on from there. Worldwide Steppers, that was an interesting one as well, and the idea of sort of tap dancing around issues, which was another theme throughout this album, where Kendrick, at a certain point, at a certain song, he's directly confronted with his partner, or the person who's playing his partner, to basically, deal with the issues that, he's kind of struggling, and his internal struggles, and kind of like take ownership of, whether it be like his own toxic masculinity, or his, depression, or I mean, it's very well done. And I wish I had thought this out more thoroughly, but Worldwide Steppers, I wish I had done this when the album was fresh in my mind. Yes, another thing about the album is that there is the inclusion of Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual teacher, kind of the new agey teacher of the power of now. And there is, okay, so this line, probably the most Kendrick line ever put on release, I would say. Playing Baby Shark with my daughter, watching out for the sharks at the same time. Like, there's something so great about that imagery, and it really does feel like a Kendrick line, but almost like a parody of a Kendrick line. But in a way, Kendrick is, yeah, I'll say this. Looking at the lyrics here, I can see that. So one thing about this album is that Kendrick has opened up as an artist, and he has allowed himself to be more vulnerable. Good Kid, Mad City, we kind of got that a little bit, where we got Kendrick as a young man and his experiences in the world, but this was really him opening up about him struggling with writer's block, him trying to kind of, get, I mean, of course, so yes, this was an interesting song where he talks about an interracial relationship that he was in, and he was sort of dating this white woman for, I guess, retribution in a way for his ancestors, and it it seems like a, yeah. So Good Kid, Mad City tour, I flourished on them stages. Whitney asked, did I have a problem? I said I might be racist. Ancestors watching me was like retaliation. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's, again, that sort of goes back to the idea that he's sort of talking about, like owning up to his toxic traits, if you will, and kind of like, things that he did, and people put Kendrick on such a high pedigree and with such esteem, that he kind of felt it necessary to knock himself down a few pegs, and that is sort of what the album is about, but not just his um, personal struggle, but it is about that as well. And he talks about of his trauma, but as well as I mean, he talks about cancel culture on N95 as well, and he talks about kind of being hesitant, I guess, to or reluctant to open up, and that is I guess sort of one of the overlying messages of many, right? So there, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. For example, the media is the new religion. You killed the consciousness. Your jealousy is way too pretentious. You killed accomplishments. And yes, this definitely does seem like a shot at cancel culture. Um, and I don't know, I found it weird how the media has sort of addressed this, because the media, in a way, won't knock themselves a few pegs. And I say that as being a media person. Um, there's a lot of self righteousness and self seriousness, and so there's the idea that it's not cancel culture, it's accountability, where realistically it's a little bit of column A and it's a little bit of column B. And yeah, I just think, yeah, the industry has killed the creators. I'll be the first to say to each exec, I'm saving your children, we can't negotiate. Yeah, so it is very interesting to hear Kendrick, who is considered a more than a troubadour. You know, what he's doing here is, he might as well be Dante at this point. He is writing down, the 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 book. There is a word for what I'm looking for, but I just can't think of it at the moment, and that's fine. Um, yeah, and like I said, one thing that's interesting about this album is that Kendrick is critical, and this is something that has been a theme throughout his music. So, as different as some of these sounds may be, or maybe lacking in sort of the ostentatious production and, uh, you know, having big name producers all over the project, Kendrick's words really have a different impact with a more muted production in the background. And, he talks about giving out, or what was it? So he going into the community and doing like a Christmas drive and talking about how, the food that they were delivering was killing people in the black community as well, through sort of like high sodium content and not good, uh, because the high blood pressure flood in the catering. So what's the difference between your life when you're hiding motives? More fatalities and reality bring you closure. And that, as in a way, that's also talking about kind of what Nas was saying on King's Disease, right? And sort of talking about not necessarily, the black on black crime taking out his peers or contemporaries, but kind of like the idea of just living life kind of like too well, and King's disease being gout and that kind of thing. So while Kendrick was trying to, and TDE was probably trying to do a good thing, if they are giving out food that's not so good, that I could see why that would weigh on their conscience once they understand that fact. So Kendrick will be sort of kind of the first person to kind of criticize himself, and that's kind of interesting. As an artist, he always has kind of like something on his mind that's sort of like weighing on his mind. Kendrick comments on the nature of cancel culture, implying everyone, including himself, is conditioned to denounce others to scratch the itch of feeling superior. Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. Yeah, the germophobic, heterophobic, or heterophobic? I thought it said hetero and homophobic. It was a very weird chorus. Germophobic, hetero, and homophobic. Photoshop and lies in the motives. Hide your eyes, then pose for the pic. Yeah, I mean, pose for the pic obviously is sort of like do it for the gram, and kind of like the veneer of social media. And yeah, I mean that's definitely a thing. So yeah, this line for sure. A billion people on Earth, silent murderers, non-prophets, preachers in church, crooks and burglars. So yeah, he is talking about like the hypocrisy within human beings, right? And how we all contradict ourselves, and I think that is sort of the general theme of that song. So I just want to change gears for a bit. One of the songs I really want to talk about is Father Time. Because Father Time really hit me different. And that song was incredibly vulnerable. And I think that what's interesting is like Kendrick's newly a father, and that has obviously been on his mind, and his relationship to his father has been on his mind. And as somebody who has had a fraught relationship with their own father, this song weighed heavily on me. This song hit me in a way, and it just, I didn't think it was really unexpected that this particular song would come from Kendrick, I think. He talks about having daddy issues and that kind of thing. And again, like the Good Kid, Mad City thing, like his parents appear on that album. And yeah, I don't know. There's, again, like kind of dealing with the toxic traits of masculinity, but it's also like that's at the time that a lot of us, I think, kind of grew up with a sort of blueprint that was kind of like passed down from previous generations, and like it's very different being a man in today's world than it was for our previous generation. And I mean that is something that I definitely think about internally a lot. So I will say it does seem like, as he is talking about sort of the toxic masculinity and toxic traits, there is, I would argue that, Kendrick, some of the traits, Kendrick gives credit or gives his dad, I guess, some grace in the sense that he's kind of saying that, like, this part kind of like instilled in me this idea to, like push forward or that kind of thing. I'm charging baskets and falling backwards, trying to keep balance. Oh, this is the part where mental stability meets talent. Oh, this is the part he breaks my humility just for the practice. And I mean, yeah, so, there's both pros and cons to that approach. Because if I cried about it, he'd surely tell me not to be weak. Okay, so that's toxic. Daddy issues, hid my emotions, never express myself. Men should never show feelings. Being sensitive never helped. Yeah, so the second verse kind of talks about like how it's still like an extreme, right? Where it's like, yes, you taught me how to push forward and kind of like, according to this, probably his father grew up in a macho environment, in a nutshell, in an era, and because he was educated that way and obviously thought it was the right thing to do. Yeah. Yeah. Again, and it kind of goes into the contradiction of, people. And this specifically is, the kind of contradiction of being particularly a cis man, right? So, just, that's his experience and just, the kind of what he's talking about. So, yeah, I mean, and part of the reason why this song resonates with me in particular is because I've definitely had, similar advice throughout my life, like this, either from if not my father directly, a male figure in my life, somebody, like things like this, right? So, son, that's life. The bill's got no silver spoon. Daddy issues, fuck everybody. Go get your money, son. Like there is that kind of like, take care of your family, take care of your money kind of mentality. And it is kind of like, so if you took some likings around me, I might reject the love. Daddy issues kept me competitive. So yeah, that in line in particular, like I said, it's kind of like the internal conflict, the internal struggle where, Kendrick can appreciate that some of his toxic traits did in fact or he benefited from some of these like male toxic traits, let's say. And at the same time, he can see that it traumatized him as a child and caused grief. And, because of that, I guess he may not have been as like open to love at a certain point. Right. So, and he's kind of being afraid to be vulnerable. Another line I particularly related to: what's the difference when your heart is made of stone and your mind is made of gold and your tongue is made of sword? As somebody who like basically grew up being kind of like a smart ass, I kind of related to that. I don't know if that's what he meant, but I mean, saying you have a heart of stone, cruel nature, mind of gold, tongue made of sword, critical things. So yeah, maybe he was saying like overly critical things. And yeah, I love my father for telling me to take the gloves off because everything he didn't want was everything I was. Take the gloves off. Recalls how Kenny Duckworth, his father, was encouraging him to fight aggressively. Yes, okay. So I would say I highlighted sort of the main theme is just like the, like I said, the persistence that Kendrick learned and kind of learning to push through life's difficulties is definitely something that is taught, in terms of like being a man, because it's like shit's gonna get difficult. You're gonna have to learn how to deal with it, and that's just part of being a man. And really, it can be so toxic in a way because it's like you're just expected to kind of be like, yep, this is what it is. You have to deal with it. And I can very much relate to that. I wouldn't say necessarily like, my own father saying these exact words or for these reasons. And I would say, I would even argue Kendrick's probably closer with his father than I ever was. But there is some good in these traits, which I think is interesting, that I think maybe like not all listeners are necessarily going to pick up on. Maybe they will, but because there has been kind of this over the year, like kind of branding of toxic masculinity and men are trash and all these kinds of things, all these Twitter speak idioms. And, I kind of look at it and I kind of shake my head. And at the same time, it's like there is a modicum of truth to some of these things, I guess. Men can be quite evil, like in the case of Harvey Weinstein and, several other, predators. Men can definitely be predatory. But that's not to say that, men are inherently evil. And this is why I like this song so much, because it really kind of gives a balance of like, as much as like it caused me trauma, it caused me grief, it did teach me how to persist and how to overcome and I learned to be resilient. So, hopefully Kendrick will, since he is now a father, will teach his kids to be resilient in a different way, in a less traumatizing way, but still kind of instill a way of resilience or a path of resilience in his kids, because it is important. And I did like this line, "Till then, let's give the woman a break, grown men with daddy issues." And that's sort of him acknowledging that he's saying so the annotation here is saying he put his partner through all this trauma because of his own unaddressed trauma. And, his partner is sort of saying like, you really need to talk to somebody, you need to go to therapy and, break the cycle of trauma. You need to break the cycle of trauma. Get help, talk about it. Don't consciously follow what your ego drives you to do. And toxic masculinity that is passed on from generation to generation, sometimes actively by a father who is present and other times through the absence of a father figure. A momentous theme on this project, Lamar goes in depth about his struggles with mental health. Yep. Opening on the song with a short sketch with his partner, Whitney Alford. One other thing, and I guess this kind of touches on the theme of, it's not really my place to talk about it, but I will just mention it because it is part of the song and part of the theme. So, in the Black community, there is the idea of, that there needs to be more active fathers, and there's the idea of the absent male father and that kind of thing, which I think is kind of aggrandized, or I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. I think it's kind of like, I wouldn't say, there's definitely a conversation that's sort of being had at the moment about it and the presence of father figures. And, that some feel that, the lack of a male role model is why, people may enter into gang culture or, commit black on black violence. And I think that's a very oversimplified argument. I mean, there are other societal reasons. And like I said, it's not really my place to sort of delve into that topic, but Father Time kind of does broach this subject. And, Kendrick's father, Duckworth, Kenny Duckworth was, kind of affiliated. And this was a topic that was broached up on the previous album. So it is kind of interesting how that ties in to one another together. Oh, man. Yeah, I definitely have to talk about We Cry Together, right? Like, I just got to. So We Cry Together is intense. Oh, man. So it's a back and forth with, Kendrick and Taylor Page, who plays his partner, and they're having this, disagreement. It's kind of like this, almost like men are from Mars, women are from Venus type of moment. But it's like they're really going at each other's throats, and they're like in a toxic. They're really being toxic to one another. And what's and again, this theme of toxicity and trauma and so on, it gets really ugly and gets really real. And anybody who's been in a toxic relationship, I would say, could relate to this. I mean, I definitely could see parts of this that I could relate to. Okay, that's a weird annotation. I don't think this is about the state of hip hop, my dude. I think this is like literally about like, interpersonal relationships. And this is the part where he says like, stop tap dancing around the issues. Tap dancing. I think. Oh, maybe it was. Yeah, stop dancing around the conversation at the outro. Um, right. Some fans are theorizing that Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is a therapy session. Uh, okay. Okay. I mean, I would say so, but not this particular track. Anyways, I was going to mention that this song is very reminiscent of um, Kim. It definitely has that same intensity where it's like you don't want to play it like around other people really because it's just like you feel like you stepped into somebody else's conversation or like somebody else's drama and it gets very real. And their arguments aren't the greatest. Um, like, you know, Kendrick kind of saying that there should be solidarity between, women in R&B. Like that was kind of funny, but it just like was so like, bruh, what? I guess it provides a sense of levity to an intense song, so it does work. Um, and yeah, so you're the reason we overlooked, underpaid, underbooked, under shame. Why they say it's a man's world. Yeah, at one point, you can, so yeah, she's kind of analyzing Kendrick's deeper emotional problems. Yeah. See, and this is the kind of thing, right? So this song works because too, like your romantic partner or significant other is gonna know your vulnerabilities kind of the best, and she really breaks it down for him, like, yo, like you ain't dealing with this, and this is like how you really are, and it gets really, like I said, it gets really real, and so she sounds truly vulnerable and hurt in these lines until she takes it too far and finds a relevant entry to start recriminating her again. Find it funny you can't just apologize. I mean, I think a lot of men deal with that too, where it's like, you don't want to like cop out because, as a man, you're told to like, live by your word type of thing. So it's like, if you feel like you apologize and you back out, and there's so many like songs that like sort of open a can of worms, I guess, so to speak. And I guess that's also why Kendrick felt, kind of like dealing with cancel culture is kind of a mess, and that kind of thing is interesting. Silent Hill, he put Kodak Black on, and the song is kind of like a straightforward rap song. I would say probably like the only song that isn't like kind of layered with meaning, I would say, and it's kind of interesting. And I think he references Kodak in another track, and again, he trying to, kind of to take himself a few pegs, where he says like, like I'm not your savior, that kind of thing, or he's not hip hop savior. He's, like again, like that sort of thing. But heavy is the head that wears the crown, as they say. And Kendrick on the album art is, of course, wearing a crown. And yeah, bringing Kodak Black onto the album, I guess I would, rather than talk about Kodak Black. So I know people had an issue with this, and the other song, which I'm going to bring up, which is Anti Diaries. Which, yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of where the problem lies, right? Where it's like, artistically, you see Kendrick's vision and why he chose to do the song, because he felt like it was a personal story where he could relate a story about, having a trans person in his family who he felt was marginalized, and kind of giving a micro version to sort of you know, a macro expression, if you will, and obviously, trans people obviously deal with a lot of discrimination and prejudice and that kind of thing. And sort of this was like a way of kind of like zeroing in on that. Arguably wasn't his personal story to tell. But I mean, again, like I kind of what I said about like the Nipsey thing, I do feel like it's his family. I feel like they would have had like a conversation about it. Kendrick is a storyteller. He is a troubadour. I believe I am using that word correctly. Troubadour meaning. And I think Kendrick gets the point across. Now, I am speaking from a cis heteronormative perspective, and I'm sure there are many things, and many people in the LGBT community did take issues with it. And of course, there is a lot of, I guess, transphobia, with the Dave Chappelle special, the Ricky Gervais special that just came out, and has sort of been making headlines because of, I in one sense, I don't want to call them jokes because I guess the trans community didn't take it that as a joke, and therefore it's an issue. But the Ricky Gervais's form of creative expression that may have done more harm than good, and that is kind of like the overall problem. And this song, some could argue where it's like, it's meeting people where they're at rather than where you would like them to be. And, that is an interesting perspective. And I would say that's probably like my own perspective, where it's like, well, you got to kind of do it in baby steps and, meet people where they're at before you can say like, holy, like or give them the totality of the picture, like give them something to work with. I think this was something to work with because I can see somebody who maybe was more prejudiced listening to this song and being like, oh, you know what? There are things that about this song that are relatable. And I do think Kendrick extends empathy quite well in the song. But, I can also see why it's quote unquote problematic. And and that's the thing about Kendrick, and for Kendrick to be problematic, it is kind of why I have an issue. It's like I don't have an issue with this song. And it's like, if you're calling Kendrick problematic, what do you think of the rest of us? Like Kendrick is somebody who's won the Pulitzer Prize for his creativity, his expression, and he has obviously a way with words. Now, you could say like, it was a good concept, he poorly executed, but I think that's a cop-out. I don't think Kendrick poorly executed this. I think he did I think the overlying message was conveyed, right? And what he was trying to do. Now, it probably, shouldn't end there in terms of, being an ally, right? So to speak. So, we all have more work to do in terms of, how we, maybe interact with people. And yeah, I think we all say and do things that can be misguided, but at the end of the day, I do think like, intention, like his intent needs to be met in good faith. And I think Kendrick, above all, his intent was, it should be met in good faith. It was what he was doing was an overall positive. I don't agree that there should have been as much pushback as there was, and I think it's it's kind of like settled in now, and I think it's like, okay, well, we're having a conversation about this, and yeah, it is what it is. Mother I Sober, that's another one where Kendrick talks about a very personal story and talks about his mother being assaulted, and I mean, and this ties with Anti Diaries because there's accusations of a family member doing something to Kendrick, and Kendrick saying no, that never happened, and his mother not believing him, and that really traumatized him. Yeah, so there is definitely yeah yeah. So Kendrick's mother was sexually assaulted, and he mentions that in a song, and it's like it's a tough thing. Like I said, like it is not an easy album to listen through. You definitely have to be in the mood for it. You definitely have to kind of be, um, you know, um, I would say open minded, but not just like open minded, um, open to learning and open to self reflection, and open to thinking and learning about the world around you. So one of the things Kendrick says here, I know the secrets every other rapper sexually abused. I see him daily bearing their pain in chains and tattoos. And that is yeah. So he definitely is displaying radical candor here, that is for sure. And yeah, he talks about PTSD, and yeah, man. I mean, this song, yeah, you broke a generational curse. Damn. This album, it it is poignant. It it is a man. How I'm having trouble with the words. Come on, Mr. Writer. This album really is a tour de force. If I could, really, I would give Kendrick a second Pulitzer for this album, because what he accomplishes with this album, in my opinion, is something I think an artist can maybe only achieve once in a generation. And I think he's obviously done great things with To Pimp a Butterfly. Damn, did receive great acclaim as well, and he won the Pulitzer for that. This album very much kind of is in the same vein of the To Pimp a Butterfly poet, troubadour, you know, uh, living artist, once in a generation artist album that is Kendrick Lamar. And this album does that, despite what, you may hear from other reviews saying, kind of, knocking it down a few pegs because of the inclusion of somebody like Kodak Black or something. I understand, but I think that if we're going to say that this album can't be a classic, or it can't be, or it doesn't deserve, the same reverence that an album like To Pimp a Butterfly does. Like, I get it. Maybe some people wouldn't, you know, some people who, depending on their trauma, may not be able to listen to a song with Kodak Black on it. Like, I understand that. I do understand that. Don't get me wrong. And so maybe To Pimp a Butterfly is more accessible to them. But then I would argue To Pimp a Butterfly isn't accessible to everyone anyways, right? Like, it was still exclusionary to a point. While that may be for different things, I mean, it's definitely a more um, cerebral um, album in its approach, right? And I think this album definitely does that as well, and it tries to be cerebral, but it does kind of bring in the elements of Damn, where it doesn't dumb it down, or doesn't dumb down the album, so to speak, but kind of tries to provide a microcosm in a kind of macro world. And Kendrick, tries to, like I said, self-deprecate and bring himself down a few pegs. And I think that's kind of necessary, because we definitely, as a culture, or hip hop culture, holds Kendrick in such high esteem, because he is kind of like this once in a generation artist. And, you know, I can understand why people have problems with the inclusion of Kodak Black, in, like, the slur included in anti diaries, I think, is like, it's interesting that he chose to do that. You know, right or wrong, I think it's still, I would say it's the use of the slur serves the song, and it makes the impact of the song, like when he says, the white girl on stage, his cousin kind of challenging him on that, of the white girl on stage moment, where she couldn't say the N word, and he's like, yeah, we're not doing that. And his cousin's like, well, if it's just a word, then and I feel, because I feel the impact at the end of that song is that was a moment of personal growth for Kendrick. And I kind of think, like, Kendrick is trying to bring people on his journey to grow as a person as well. But, and this is kind of like what he was kind of commentating on in regards to cancel culture. It's like, well, I'm not saying we're going to cancel Kendrick, but, some people, I guess, aren't going to support Kendrick's music going forward because of including Kodak Black. And I think he's okay with that decision. But I think it is such a shame that, that there can't be a space where we recognize that, yeah, that, maybe the inclusion of Kodak Black wasn't the smartest thing, but it does serve a purpose. He did it for a reason. Like a director does, sets up each shot for a reason, right? And Kendrick is meticulous in how he arranges his album. And, he's not your savior. And I kind of think that's sort of the point of the album, while at the same time trying to push forward and kind of using that persistence that he may have gained from, his father and that toxic masculinity to get a degree of closure and break free from the cycle of trauma. And kind of like, purging the demons, so to speak, right? And he talks about, like, his infidelity as a result, because everybody deals with their own stuff differently, and some people turn to tattoos and drinks and drugs, and he comments on that. And his thing, as he mentions, was his infidelity. And I think, a lot of people said that, they didn't expect that from Kendrick. And it's like, well, you definitely had an image of Kendrick that may not necessarily matched up to what Kendrick is like in real life, right? And maybe we shouldn't be deifying, celebrities in that sense, right? Because they're just human at the end of the day. And this album is Kendrick at his most human. And I think I'll end it there.